Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Stonekeep for PC. This is an old school dungeon crawler that was released in 1995 for DOS and Windows, and it's interesting to note that it had a pretty troubled development. It took way longer than it was supposed to, it ended up costing way more than it was supposed to, and it basically had to be redesigned in the middle of production. And at first it was going to be on floppy disks, and they changed it onto CDs. They changed the rendering thing from just hand-drawn sprite art and such like that to eventually green screen effects. It was pretty much a mess. And when it finally came out, it was released to a pretty decent amount of acclaim. People generally liked it, but they did notice a lot of problems with it. And since its release, it has earned this kind of cult status because a lot of people still don't like it. And it's understandable why. I'll get to that more when I get to the gameplay. But its development history makes you wonder, was it worth the wait, and is it still worth playing today? Or was it just kind of one of those things where it was too caught up on the technical aspects of the time, and it really probably shouldn't have been released? Well, the presentation certainly speaks of the time and the troubled development, which is to say that it really hasn't aged well. This was released in 1995, which is around the time that FMV games were becoming popular. Now, they did use FMV for cutscenes in this game, and it actually works out pretty well, to be honest with you. There aren't a lot of cutscenes in this game, and to be honest, they're pretty well done. They're decently acted, they have quite a few nice effects to them. They do a decent job of telling the story. It's surprising how just good the cutscenes in this game actually are. That said, the acting itself is kind of cheesy, and this really extends to the monsters in the game, which some of them are 3D models, but a lot of them are actually kind of actors in costume that were recorded on a green screen. And so, it looks kind of ridiculous at certain points, and their movements are really exaggerated and such like that. It just looks odd. And then you have the actual just dungeon itself, which is kind of confusing, because there's only a handful of tile sets in this game, and they're repeated constantly. So you'll have, for a couple of floors, the same tile set, and then you'll get to a new floor, and it's a new tile set, and so on and so forth. And they're well detailed, but there's almost no variation in them. So they end up looking very samey. You end up kind of getting lost until you get the map, and even then you kind of get lost. It's kind of a problem, actually. Even though they are visually fairly good, they're still very problematic to actually play through. And they aren't really visually appealing despite being high-quality visuals for the time. And you'll just get really tired of seeing those same tile sets over and over and over again for hours on end, because this is a pretty long game. But then you have the sound design, which is kind of a contrast to the visuals, which means, of course, the music is decent. It's nothing particularly amazing, but it's decent. The voice acting, which, yes, pretty much everything in this game is voice acted. Even the reading of notes is voice acted. All the characters have voices. It's surprising, actually. They did a pretty good job with it. And it's cheesy, and it's kind of meant to be cheesy. At least that's what you get from it. They just kind of had fun with it. That is to say, it kind of takes you out of the mood of the game a little bit, because the game actually is pretty dark in terms of storyline. But that cheesy voice acting makes it just kind of laughable at times, and it's contrasting with the mood. But anyway. So they did do a decent job with that, and the sound effects themselves, while being fairly low quality in terms of the sound files, are pretty decent for the most part. But it's not really the presentation that's the forefront here, even though that was one of the biggest challenges they actually faced. What really matter are the story and the gameplay, and the story in this one is convoluted, confusing, and very disjointed. The disjointed bit comes from it being a dungeon crawler, and you having several hours of gameplay in between each story bit. And so that just makes you kind of forget what happened several hours ago, and suddenly you're getting more storyline, and it's not really making a lot of sense. Now, you get the overall storyline. You play as a guy named Drake, and he was living in the castle of Stonekeep when this malevolent wave of energy from this malevolent deity kind of character named Cool Coom just annihilates everything. But Drake is whisked away by Thera, who is basically this spirit of Earth kind of thing. They don't do a very good job of explaining the various spirits, deities, kind of things. In fact, the world itself is just not well described at all in the game. So it's very hard to decipher what each individual thing actually is, for the most part. But many years later, Thera brings Drake back to Stonekeep in order for him to fulfill his destiny, which is to defeat Kulkum. And that's kind of it. That's basically the entire overarching storyline throughout the entirety of the game. And you really only need to know that, but the game feels the need to throw in these bits where it's just extra storyline, and it just feels kind of unnecessary. Like they just kind of threw it in there to lengthen out the game some more. And this is a little bit of a problem, because you end up not really caring so much about the storyline, and you have to rely entirely on the gameplay itself, which is a pretty standard dungeon crawler for the most part, although it has some interesting twists on it. Aside from being visually impressive for the time, it was kind of different in how it handled the playing of a dungeon crawler. It's still the grid-based system where you move in one of 4 directions, and you can turn around and go certain ways. You fight monsters, you pick up items, that sort of thing. But the inventory system is a scroll, and it actually explains things in the game of how you're able to control your inventory and your equipment. You get this scroll, which allows you to put any item you want into it, and you can have stacks of up to 99 of the same item. And it explains that this scroll basically is a magic scroll where you inscribe the item in the scroll, and it's like a bag of holding, I guess is the best way to describe it, only it's a scroll. And it is kind of a pain to navigate, because you do actually have to scroll up and down this, scroll, and find the item that you want, and how you want to use it and such like that. So that's a little bit of annoyance. The equipment itself is done through this magic mirror, which when you scroll it down, you can see what Drake is using. Of course, you also get party members as well later on in the game, and you'll be able to equip them as well. But you can swap out armor, and when you actually put it on them, it shows up as them having it. Each hand can have a different weapon, or just a different item in general. Right and left click both control the different arms, for instance. Or if you look at an item, for instance, you can right-click to instantly pick it up and put it on your scroll, or you can left-click to pick it up and move it around in the inventory, or not just the inventory, but in the world around you. But other than that, you're pretty much just running around a dungeon, whacking things in the face, flipping switches, solving puzzles, that sort of thing. There are a few boss fights here and there, and they're actually kind of annoying, because they just kind of interrupt the gameplay with this segment that's even more difficult than the rest of the game. And believe me, this game is difficult. It's one of the more difficult dungeon crawlers I've played, actually. And that's because it just doesn't forgive you for anything. You're on your own throughout this entire thing. It doesn't help you. In fact, you even start the game not having an auto map, or even a mini-map of any kind. You don't even get to see what your stats are until about half an hour-ish into the game, because then you have to find the journal so you can inscribe your skills and everything. You do actually improve your skills by using various weapons or spells or stuff like that. For instance, if you want to improve your sword skill, then you use swords. If you want to improve daggers, you use daggers, and so on and so forth. That said, the skill system itself gets a little bit annoying if you choose to find what is basically the best weapon in the game, which is at the very, very beginning. It will break your game, so just don't do that. Because later on in the game, you'll basically need this magic sword that you'll need, of course, to defeat bosses and such. And if you've been leveling up your dagger skill by using this extremely powerful dagger, then you've broken your game, so don't do that. But if you don't get that dagger, then the game is just extremely difficult for quite a long time, actually. Because you start out, obviously, with no armor and basically no weapons, and the first thing you get is a dagger. And daggers are practically useless. So it's not until later on in the game where you actually feel like you're competent in anything, and even then, it's still very difficult. So, if you look for difficulty in your dungeon crawlers, this is certainly one to check out. I mean, even on normal difficulty, it's still pretty hard. So, that's something to keep in mind. And sometimes the game just feels like it drags on, and it actually does, because not only are you going through the same tile sets and in these surprisingly massive maze pattern kind of things, but you're doing basically the same exact thing over and over again, which is just going and going and going. And sometimes you'll find a door, sometimes you'll need a key. You go back and forth. There's a lot of backtracking in this game. A lot of backtracking. And that's kind of it, actually. I mean, if you're a fan of dungeon crawlers, you'll probably think it's okay, but it does drag on for quite some time. Now, that doesn't mean it's not enjoyable. It is enjoyable if you play it in short periods. But if you're going to sit there and just be like, I'm going to play this all day, you are going to get tired of it. It is that simple. This is not a game you can just pick up and go for hours on end. You just can't do it. Otherwise, you get extremely bored. So, those are kind of issues that you have to overcome when playing this game. Now, personally, I enjoy it. I don't enjoy it a huge amount. I mean, it's a decent dungeon crawler, and it does have its problems. And believe me, it has a lot of problems. But it's enjoyable. The only other problem I have with it is that it's really long, and there's lots of segments where it just feels like it's just tacked on or drawn out just for the sake of drawing it out. And if you're really interested in how the game plays out and such, Kakoskia did a Let's Play of it, and he did a very good Let's Play of it, in fact. And you can look into that if you're interested, and it's a very long Let's Play, owing to how long the game actually is, so... it is an interesting dungeon crawler, and it's worth playing if you're a fan of the genre. I definitely don't recommend it if you're trying to get into dungeon crawlers, because you will be just turned off immediately and be like, whoa, this thing is way too difficult, and it's just confusing. I mean, for instance, the magic system takes a lot of getting used to. You have to inscribe runes on your spellcaster and then use it. It's kind of a difficult system to get used to. Even if you're used to other dungeon crawlers, it still takes some getting used to how the game actually plays out. Because it is a fairly simplified system, even though it does have all the hallmarks of these older school dungeon crawlers and such. But it's certainly worth checking out, but again, don't play it for long periods of time. Don't go into it if you're trying to get into dungeon crawlers. And if you're really a fan of the genre, you'll probably enjoy it, but that's kind of all I can recommend it to. I will have a link in the video description box to where you can get it. Thanks for watching.